ultimately, I think if you want to be operating in the space you want to be operating in, several $100,000 plus a year, you need to be co-designing your projects with your clients. Because when you do that, right, you're a partner together with your client in the work that you're doing, right? They're not telling you what to do, you're not telling them what to do.
And now, longtime freelance developer, founder of Freelance GPS, and recently launched the latest version of the Freelancer Jumpstart course. Please welcome Tim Noetzel. Thank you for joining us, Tim.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh yeah, I'm so excited. I can't wait for you to pick apart every little nitty detail of the things I'm doing wrong in my freelance career. I don't know what you call it, but anyways, yeah, I'm really excited. And just for people that might not have context, what is Freelance GPS and who should use it or go check it out?
Yeah, so freelancegps.com is obviously a website, but it's an effort I started a couple of years ago after I kind of started finding success in my own freelance career and wanted to help other developers, designers, and tech folks do the same. So I've got a free course on how to build a successful kind of high growth freelancing business, kind of soup to nuts. I also work one on one with developers and designers who are either just starting out or are seasoned freelancers kind of looking to take their freelance business to the next level. So,
Yeah.
really, I'm kind of trying to help freelancers succeed because it's been, such a fun journey, but also such a great step in my career, and I want to see more folks doing the same.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really great to me it's really exciting to see people trying to like give back and help teach people in that way. Um I'm curious though, like what type of person is this actually for? Like the course and everything? Is this for, somebody that doesn't know programming? Is it specific to programming? Is it like, hey, I work at McDonald's and I want to get into this? Is this for somebody that is running an agency and already has people working for them? Like what do you feel it's most optimal for?
Yeah, so the course really focuses on kind of what I consider to be the kind of three sort of tent poles of a successful freelance career in tech, right? Which
Hmm.
is figuring
Yeah.
out who your ideal clients are, developing a system for meeting them on an ongoing basis, right? The sort
Mm.
of marketing portion, and then ultimately closing the sale and setting yourself up for success. So it's really geared towards anybody in tech who either wants to freelance or kind of wants to take their freelance business to the next level. I've got kind of two tracks. One for people who are a little bit newer to freelancing, and one for people who are a little bit more seasoned. But I'd say like the sort of prerequisite requirements, if you will, are that you have some kind of a skill set in tech, right? Doesn't have to necessarily have to be really advanced. If you're a developer, even just knowing like HTML and CSS could be enough.
Yeah.
But you probably don't want to be either fresh out of school or not know either any programming or any design or any marketing, right? But if you can do that or have been doing it professionally, even as kind of a junior level person, you're in good shape, right? There are clients out there for everybody, and many of them just need basic skills that they quite frankly don't have. And so the course helps you kind of figure out how do you find those clients who are a good fit for you, and how do you land them.
That sounds amazing. Like, sign me up, right? Um, so, I wanna do you have any, like, success stories you can talk about, like, that you've experienced through your coaching and teaching in the course? Like, maybe something very specific, specific as you can be?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, everything I teach in the course was kind of based on what I learned sort of the hard way through my freelancing career. I started, freelancing at $0, and have built my business up to a 480K a year business. It's still just me. I don't have like a team. I haven't built an agency. In fact, I've kind of actively resisted doing that for a long
Yeah.
time. But yeah, one of the folks I've coached, a guy named Michael, um, had a really kind of interesting situation. When I started working with him, he was kind of a junior developer, sort of on the upper end of junior. He knew he wanted to start freelancing, but had never done it before. Didn't really feel like he had a huge network that he could tap into because he'd really only been at one kind of full time dev job, and he was still there, and he didn't want to kind of tap that network and start saying, "Hey, I'm freelancing," for reasons that I think a lot of people can relate to, right? And he had also just moved to a new city, and he didn't know anybody. And in a matter of weeks of working together with him, he had landed his first client. Was making thousands of dollars from that, and had an hourly rate of about 150 bucks an hour from that first client. And was on track to really kind of control his own destiny, and decide if he wanted to keep working full time, if he wanted to and just freelance on the side, if he wanted to transition to a full time freelance role. Shortly after that, he landed a retainer client, that was several $1,000s a month on an ongoing basis. And he said to me, and this was honestly just extremely humbling, that working together, frankly, like changed his life, because he was able to save substantially more money than he had been. He has this goal of buying his parents' a house, and he said it was kind of the first time he'd ever felt on track for that.
That's
Um,
awesome. That's so cool to
so
hear.
so yeah, those are the kinds of results you can expect to see. It's not at all uncommon. Most of the folks I work with one on one, if they're brand new to freelancing, they end up landing their first client within kind of the first 30 to 90 days, and get everything they sort of need to learn how to land $10,000 deals or multi-thousand-dollar retainer agreements. So I think it's working. It's exciting, and honestly, I'm just thrilled to see the developers I've been coaching and working with have such success. Frankly, it's a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds fun. That's such an encouraging story. I love that. That's really cool. Uh, in that case, I thought, and we did discuss this ahead of time, but we'd kind of, sort of flip the script here a little bit. And I thought I'd give you the opportunity to sort of demonstrate what you might do with people that come to you for coaching and the course and such. So what would be a good place to start? Like if I come to you, where would we begin? What would you ask me?
Yeah, so I do a free kind of hour-long strategy session for anybody who wants to get just like a sense of like how do I progress my business and get a little bit of a roadmap. And so I think what it makes sense is probably to basically do that. The first question I ask folks is just to tell me a little bit about where you are on your freelance journey.
Yeah. All right. Well, I can do that. So I started doing freelance at the end of 2019. Before that, I had worked either as a full-time software engineer, employee type position, or in some cases, I worked on starting my own projects in my own company, and I sort of oscillated between those. So I'd been doing that for uh, I don't know, 10 years or so. It depends on when you consider things to have started. But yeah, so I have like a lot of and I've been programming for over 20 years now. So I have a lot of like deep technical knowledge and a lot of experience doing that. And I the way it all started was I was working as an employee at a company, and they went through a round of downsizing, and I got laid off with a bunch of other people, and I was like kind of like I wish I had more control over my own situation. And even if you're doing freelance, I knew you can get fired at any time. But I was like, at least maybe then I could, maybe have more than one client at a time or something like that. I was like, I just want to see if I can have more control over the situation and have more control over my working environment and these types of things. Um, and I had about 1.5 months of runway, and I was like, I will, I will just jump full in, and let's see if we can make this work. And at the time, I didn't know React, and I was like trying to figure out what do I actually freelance in, and I decided, um, I I decided for the short term, focusing on a specific technology would probably be easier for me to get work, and I was looking for a, field that was, like, big enough that I wouldn't have to spend a year trying to land some big client, and so anyways, I decided React probably made the most sense, and so I was like, "Okay, I have a month and a half to get clients, get some sort of income in some way, and teach myself React." And I immediately put up a website saying I was an expert in React, not with the intention to actually mislead anyone, but I was like, by the time I get anyone in the pipeline, I'll probably be an expert in React. So I taught myself that. And actually, during that process, I wrote a book on React, and I was like, I really want to be good at this. And so I did that worked. I started getting clients. Anyways, so that was sort of the start in my motivation for it. And then since then, I have been doing freelance work, mostly until the end of last year, so the end of 2022. And since then, I basically I haven't been doing as much. I've been doing some like one-off like consulting where people will pay me quite a bit more, and I'll just like get on the phone for an hour and sort of coach them through things type of thing. Um, but recently I decided I wanted to get back into that. Like I really enjoy being on a team and like working through things and all of that. But I also would like to do things different as well. There's always things I'd like to improve. Yeah, so I'll just tell you like so I had I haven't had a ton of clients. I've had maybe I think 5 or 6 clients throughout these years. Most of them I end up working with for 1 to 2 years. Um, and it usually starts out they'll like want me to do a little bit and then it turns into more and more, and I'm basically working for him full time at some point, and so I I think in 2022 my revenue was around like 200K, um and that's okay. I think it relative to, getting a full-time employment position, I could actually probably earn as much or more, including benefits and stuff. So I feel like, a direct thing I'd love to see improved is it's I'm probably not charging as much as I should, making that comparison. There's obviously more to it. But anyways, I don't know. Do you have more specific questions for me after that background?
Got it. No, that's a great start actually. And I mean, I think it sounds like there's two big motivations for you around freelancing, right? One of them is just that like that control and that freedom. And I hear that a ton. It's certainly one of the big reasons I was attracted to freelancing. I mentioned to you before we started recording here that my wife and I spent a year kind of traveling and doing the digital nomad thing. And like, I definitely couldn't have done that if I wasn't freelancing. And so that completely makes sense. And it sounds like the other big motivation is earning more. And which is another reason, I think a lot of people are attracted to freelancing, right? There's no artificial income cap.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
there isn't a full-time job, but the challenge is that the income's not guaranteed.
Yeah.
So I think that's great. The other thing I really kind of related to was just how you got started freelancing. Ironically, my freelance journey also started with a job search. And I
Really?
just,
Yeah.
I worked, in dev and design pretty much my whole career, but at tech startups, which are obviously like pretty volatile. And so I found
Yeah.
myself, in the middle of a job search in 2019, and I had done some freelancing on and off before then, but like I just wasn't finding anything I was excited about. And so, I kind of decided, hey, like I'm going to make that jump. But like you, I knew I had a very short amount of runway. I was, saving for a wedding and for a house at the time, and like I was like, if I don't figure this out in a month or two, I'm gonna have to go get a real job, and it's gonna be somewhere I'm not psyched about, given how the job search has been going. So, I guess my question for you, based on everything you said, was, obviously you're doing a lot right, right? Like if you're working for
Well, thank you.
clients, if you're working with clients for 1 to 2 years, like you've got good retention. You're clearly like landing some retainer agreements and ongoing work, so that's awesome. How are you finding clients today?
That is definitely the biggest, question. So I could tell you how I have found clients. So the first client I got, I just found by replying to somebody on Twitter. Um, I got another one, just somebody I put up ads on Craigslist, and I got a response there. Another one was I just put, like, kind of like an ad on, I think, Hacker News, and somebody found it there. So my sort of general philosophy has been trying to put myself out there, to have people find me, sort of self-select for me. I will say I feel like something I've learned about myself over, the years starting projects. I mean, even this podcast, I don't really probably do marketing as well as I could. Um, eh, I think when I look at my freelancing in general, like you say, I don't really have a problem like necessarily closing a sale or, you know, keeping clients. Like everybody loves my work and they're like, "Wow, this is great. I want you to do more," right? But I don't feel like I'm good at networking or marketing. And maybe I'm wrong, but that's how it feels to me. So yeah, that's how I get clients has
Got
just
it.
been that
Got it.
those types
Okay,
of things.
awesome. No, that's really helpful. Usually, when I talk to developers in particular, but freelancers in general, whether they're new to the game or they've been freelancing for a while, like you have, they've got at least one, if not all, of the following three challenges. Right. Number one, their
Yeah.
positioning isn't quite right. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Number two, their marketing's not right, or they're not doing enough of it, or both.
Yeah.
And number three, they've got some sales challenges. That doesn't necessarily mean that they can't close sales, but
Yeah.
maybe they're not closing them at high enough rates. Maybe they're not setting themselves up for success in various ways with their clients by setting like really good expectations. So yeah, I think let's dive into kind of each of those.
Okay.
And I know you mentioned, and I also cheated a little bit because I looked at your website ahead of time. But like,
Yep.
I know that you mentioned that you have kind of positioned yourself as a React expert. And I'm curious, like how that you feel like that positioning is working for you.
Yeah, so that's actually a big thing I wanted to talk about because when I got into this, I evaluated, I sort of tried to analyze what would be the best way to position myself. And when I was like, okay, I need to get work quickly, that seemed like the way to do it. But that's not really actually what I wanted to do long term. And it's not really the positioning I want to have now. And
Gotcha.
so I've experimented with like ads and different things in other sort of formats, not focused so much on being a React expert. And I have not had really much success with that. So that's kind of the place I'm at is it feels very easy for me to market myself as an expert in React. Um, and I guess the other interesting part is what I've found is a lot of the clients I've had that I don't actually end up doing much React work for them,
Hmm.
but they that's sort of the connection that we make. And so I'm unsure exactly what that means, because it's clear to me that it can lead to more of the work that I actually want, which is I really love helping people, like helping solve business problems. And so like a lot of times when I get in at companies, it's like they bring me on as a React developer. And like one case, I was working for this company, they brought me in. And within like a few weeks, I was like, so I don't actually think React is really your big problem here. You have a problem around not knowing who your customers are and how they're getting here. And so I helped them set up Google Analytics and like walk them through that kind of thing. And I find I often end up doing that like shortly like they bring me in for React, then I end up doing these other things. But what I worry is that the rates that I'm sort of bringing into these are more based on the sort of React specific side of things, which I think is probably, my guess is lower than if I was brought in to solve the actual business problems. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Got it. It absolutely does, and I'm glad that you shared that bit about solving business problems, because I think it's one of the keys to success. And I think you're again a little bit ahead of the game compared to most folks, in that you understand that implicitly. But
Mm,
what I've seen ultimately is that the freelancers who have the most success are the ones who have the best clients, right? And
mm,
client quality is directly proportional to your success, right? And so if you look at freelancers who are really
yeah,
struggling, right, who are making 20 or 30K a year, right, their client quality is like in the dumps, right? You look at freelancers like you who are hitting that 200 mark. Client quality is high, but it's not like extremely high, right? It's not
yeah,
best in class.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
And so, I think the important thing to ask then is, what does an ideal client look like, right? And how do you then match your positioning to what those people or companies need, right? And I think ideal clients have a couple of things in common. Number one, they can afford to pay premium rates. Not only that, they prefer to pay premium rates because they want to
yeah,
pay for quality. Um, Number two, they are small enough that they're easy to sell into, because as freelancers, we don't
mm,
have months or years to spend, chasing like big enterprise deals.
yeah,
And number three, they are sophisticated enough that they can ask smart questions, give good feedback, and kind of understand the norms of the web and projects around the web, right? So even if your main point of contact is say somebody in marketing or sales at your client, right? You don't have to hold their hand through things like why building for mobile is important, right? When you're building a
mm,
website, right? Like they get those things implicitly. They've done a little bit of that work, right? And a combination of all of those aspects means clients who pay really well, who are fun to work with because you're not doing a lot of hand holding, who are not constantly changing the scope last minute, who
what are
respect
you
you.
talking about? I've never
Yeah,
heard of that before.
yeah. Who respect you and your time, and who even refer business your way, right? If you have clients like that, life as a freelancer is fantastic, right? You get to work when you want, where you want, how you want, on interesting projects with interesting people, right? But if those elements are missing in some or all of your clients, right, freelancing starts to become a grind. And so I think the number one thing you can do as a freelancer is make sure that you are going after and attracting those types of clients. Um,
Yeah.
and
Ho
and
how do I do that? I
yeah,
think, and not to like, I guess if you wanna finish your thought, but, like, that's exactly my thoughts as well, but it's more like, so in React and that type of thing, it's very clear to me how to go about that, you know? Like, I kinda know what that world's like and where people looking, in that situation, I'm imagining it's, sort of a hiring manager, middle manager, somebody like that who knows technology a little bit. Maybe they manage a team. And so I know where those people might hang out, right? But if I'm looking to solve, say, some generic business problem, whatever, if I'm positioning myself that way, it seems a lot more difficult for me to wrap my head around where do those people hang out? How do I
Right.
connect to them?
Right. Well, and so I think first before we talk about where they hang out, which I think is a hugely important question, that kind of falls under the marketing arm.
Yeah.
Let's talk about who those clients are.
Yeah.
And there are a bunch of potential clients who could check all those boxes. But
Mhm.
I find it's helpful to sort of identify clients who more often than not do, like the group who almost always check those boxes.
Okay.
And for me, and I'm actually working, towards a similar set of clients with what I do. I found that tech startups and e-commerce companies between about 5 and 50 employees almost always check those boxes. And the reason is that because of the type of work they do, right? Tech startups and e-commerce companies, right? They're internet first companies, they're tech first companies, which means like they live and breathe technology. Even the like marketing and sales and customer success people like get
Yeah.
it in a way that many other companies wouldn't, because they're pretty small. They're easy to sell into. They move fast. There's not like all of this like red tape and organizational overhead that you would get in a very large company. But they're big enough because they're 5+ employees that either they've got they're cash flow positive or they've got funding from somewhere, which is a great indication that they can afford to pay premium rates. They're also tech companies, so they value what you do more
Mhm.
than non-tech companies would. Um,
Yeah.
I'd say like those types of companies would be a really good target for you, and probably for most of the folks listening here today. And so, like, that's the first thing is to say, like, all right, I'm going to go after companies who are going to more often than not check these boxes, right?
Yeah.
I'm also going to position myself in a way um, that attracts the ones who almost always check these boxes, right? And so I think that the positioning piece of this is to describe yourself and market yourself in a way that appeals to the types of clients who check all those boxes and also have the work that you want to do, right? And I think it's something along the lines of like, I Thomas am a developer, right? But unlike any old developer, I solve business problems, right? I help companies increase revenue, decrease costs. If they're a startup, get traction so they can raise their next round of funding, right? Code
Yeah.
is just the medium by which
Yeah.
I do that. And to start to have some examples and stories you can tell around times that you've done that. And for the folks who are listening who are kind of brand new and are like, well, shit, I don't have any stories like that. That's okay, right? I recommend that you start with like a target of what your long term positioning is going to be, and work your way there, right? So you don't have to start off perfectly. You don't have to start off with a million years of experience and like 80 testimonials, right? Nobody starts that way, right? But keep in mind what you're driving towards, which is like, okay, like I want to be able to say like, oh yeah, when I worked with Acme, I helped them increase their conversion rate, from 1% to 2%, right? Which is like doubled their revenue on an ongoing basis, right? That kind of thing attracts the types of companies you're trying to go after.
That makes
And
sense.
obviously,
Well, I was gonna say, actually, I that's actually how I kind of started, but what I did was I did sort of case studies on my own work. And so I was like, I'll put the like, I wasn't like trying to hide the fact that it was my own work, but I was like, why can't I take this React application I made and demonstrate how I increased, performance or conversion or whatever I was trying to do?
yeah, yeah, I think that's exactly right. There's nothing wrong with demo projects. And I think like showing that you can get a business result with a demo project, right, makes it much more compelling. There's
Yeah.
also nothing wrong with taking full time experiences and using them as examples. I think a lot of new
Mm,
freelancers feel like,
that's
well,
a
if I
great
didn't do
idea.
do all of it myself. I can't like use it as an example. That's not true, right? Like
Yeah.
even as a freelancer, you're not going to do everything yourself, right? You're still working with a team, right? The
Yeah.
question is like, okay, like you were working with a company either full time or as a freelancer. What was the business problem, right? Increased revenue, decreased costs, whatever it was. How did you contribute? And then what was the result? If you can tell that story succinctly, right, you're going to appeal to the right types of companies. Um,
Yeah, that makes sense. So I have been most of my clients have been what it sounds like you were describing as like sort of the ideal client. So most of them have been, I wouldn't say like early stage tech startups, but sort of middle, early to middle, that's actually most of the work I have been doing.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, and I think the nice thing about that, right, is like it's on a spectrum, right? Like, from like horrible clients that you actively want to repel to like your dream clients, right? And so I think the question is like how do you get further along the spectrum?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
those are going to tend to be clients who are, more data driven, right? Like they're actively, tracking
Mm,
analytics, that kind of thing, who have a clear business problem, right? Who are like, yeah, like we want to increase revenue, or we need to decrease this cost, or we need to improve site speed. That kind of thing is a big indicator, and so like it sounds like you're targeting the right people. I think part of it is potentially doing a better job attracting those people, and part of it's going to be in the sales process, which we'll get to a little bit later.
mhm.
Of how you make sure they're the right people, and also how you set expectations to train kind of clients who would otherwise be good clients to become great clients. Because that is
Yeah.
something that you can kind of do both in the sales process and while you're working, is just set the right set of expectations so that clients behave in a way that's going to be really good for your business. And I think a lot of times we think about how we need to behave as freelancers in order to like keep our clients happy, and that's hugely important. But you also want to behave in a way that trains them to work in a way with you where you succeed. So
Yeah,
we'll talk
yeah.
about that more in a minute.
I d
But I
Do you
think
mind
like,
if I like tell a little story about that
yeah,
sort of
absolutely.
client side? So I thought about this when I was starting, and I thought about like how do I like I don't want to deal with the clients that are like basically trying to nickel and dime you out of everything, and trying to get the lowest price and don't actually care that much about the work you're doing type of thing. And so I tried hard with like my ads to make it seem like that's not what I'm looking for. But like I had this one person locally, and they're like, "Hey, yeah, we can meet up and I can show you things." And I went, and they're showing me their work and what they wanted me to do, and on some level it sounded great. Basically, they wanted me to some developer had been working on it, and they stopped, and they needed me to basically do it, right? Like, I'm like, "Okay, sure. That's no problem," right? But the more I got into it, the more it was like, "Wow, this sounds really bad." Like, just a lot of little things, like, they just kept wanting to call me on the phone, and I would be like, "Well, we can we can do that, but, like, I gotta be paid for this," you know? And they started being like, "Well, not until we've signed something," and I was like, "Okay, let's sign something," you know? Like, and they wouldn't do that. Then I was like, "Well, give me a price. Tell me how much you could do this for." I'm like, "Well, I need more information. Like, I I could give you a price. It'll just be really high because I don't know what I'm getting into. Like, if I want real information, like, you gotta give me some. Can I like see what the state of the code is or whatever?" And they were like, "Oh, you gotta sign an NDA and all this and whatever." So I ended up like just convincing them to let me look at the code. And it was absolutely horrible. And I was like, "This is useless code. I can't use this. I would have to just write it. Like, that's just the reality of it. It'll be cheaper to do it that way." Anyways, I could go on, but basically I was like, I finally was like, "I don't think this is gonna work." Like, there are too many things where I feel like you're trying to dictate how I'm gonna do my own work. And so I think to me that was like a maybe a learning experience where it's like I need to be really forward about telling people hey, this is how I work. I don't know if that's the right solution, but that was the approach I took.
Yeah, I think it absolutely is, and we'll get into this in more detail when we talk about kind of the sales process. But ultimately, I think if you want to be operating in the space you want to be operating in, right, which is several $100,000 plus a year, right? Then like you need to be co-designing your projects with your clients, right?
Yeah.
And that honestly is something I would recommend for every single freelancer, regardless of their financial goals, because when you do that, right, you're a partner together with your client in the work that you're doing, right? They're not telling you what to do, you're not telling them what to do.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk about how to sort of set the stage for that when we talk about the sales process. But when you do that, right, it's much easier to like actually do the type of work that you want to do and get paid well to do it. Without like constantly being nickel and dimed. And during the sales process, you can also establish pretty clearly and relatively quickly whether or not the client is willing to behave that way.
Yeah.
Which is, and so it's a way to also weed out the clients who are going to, make you pull your hair out,
Yeah.
and actively attract the clients who actually want to collaborate.
Yeah. That
So we'll
makes
talk about
sense.
that. But I'd love to, if it's okay with you, I'd love to kind of get into the marketing piece of this and how you actually go find clients like the ones we've been talking about.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I guess do you have more specific questions? Because basically, I've told you my marketing. I put up little ads
Yeah.
here and there and point them to my website, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Um,
So I think at this stage, I don't have more questions for you on your marketing. And what I'd love to do is give you a little bit of just kind of like freelance marketing 101, if you will.
yeah.
And I think like the reality is when you're marketing anything, whether it's freelancing or something else, it's helpful to look at any sort of marketing channel or method of finding clients or customers on kind of two spectrums, right? One of them is how crowded is the channel, right?
Mm,
Are there
yeah.
tons of people, or organizations using the channel to compete for um, your client's attention, or is it relatively uncrowded, right? If you look at a lot of the channels that folks tend to recommend for freelancers, right, they tend to be very, very crowded, right? Sites like Upwork, for example, right?
Yeah.
Anybody can join Upwork, which means everybody does. That means the average project gets like 50 plus proposals. That drives your chances of closing that customer way, way down, right? It drives the average, hourly rate way down. The average hourly rate for a web development project and on Upwork is just $20 an hour, right? Which is not,
What?
a
That's
recipe for a
oh,
a high value freelance business, obviously. But you can also look at that, for paid ads, right? Obviously, a very competitive channel, social media, blogging, right? When you engage in any of those channels, you are essentially competing with every other marketer out there on the internet. Not just freelancers, but like
right.
Pepsi
Yeah.
and McDonald's and whoever else for your client's attention, right? And so it becomes really, really challenging to cut through the noise. And I don't want to say like these channels don't work, but it's a question of how effective and how efficient they are. Another spectrum that you should think about when you're evaluating ways to market yourself is how much time, money, and effort it takes to use that channel, both upfront and on an ongoing basis.
Mm,
Upwork, for example, right, the so-called expert advice by a lot of the like, sort of freelance boot camps out there is that if you're actively looking for work, you need to be submitting between 25 and 50 proposals a week.
are you
I don't
kidding
know.
me?
Yeah, and the math does, in their defense, make sense given that there are
Holy
50
cow.
plus proposals for every given project, right? But like I don't know anybody who could do that number of proposals without spending like 25 plus hours a week doing them, right? And have them be in top
Yeah.
quality, right? Which
That
means at
sounds
a
miserable. Like, if I'm
yeah,
being honest,
it
like,
is. It's absolutely miserable. At a bare minimum, that means a ton of work, to get any one client. And as we just discussed, the clients hanging out on Upwork probably aren't the highest quality either, right?
I
It also
imagine
means
they're for to be cheap too, right? Like that,
right, right. They
and
tend to be very
that's
cost conscious.
yeah,
They're not the types of clients that we were just talking about for the most part. And it also means that if you choose that as your marketing channel, right, you are going to have huge peaks and valleys in your business because it's so time consuming that you can't do it while you're actively working with more than one client, right?
yeah,
And so that's really challenging, right? Social media and blogging, as another example, right? They take a ton of time up front to start to get traction. And they also take a ton of effort on an ongoing basis, right? And so to do them well, you have to spend, 10, 20, 30 hours a week, really doing it. You might have to wait 6 months unless you've already got like a huge following of the right people.
yeah,
To do that. So that's a challenge. And so, like, the question then becomes, like, what is that marketing channel that's kind of like, if you think about this as like an XY grid, right? Like, what's that marketing channel that's up in that right hand corner, where it is relatively uncrowded, and it doesn't take that much time, money, and effort to use and to do, right? So that you can do it from day one, start to get success quickly, but also continue to do it while you're actively working with your clients, so that you don't have huge issues.
yeah.
And what I have found after a lot of trial and error, I tried every single one of those channels that I just mentioned.
Wow.
I came
Yeah.
by these lessons the hard way. What I found is one-on-one conversations are far and away more efficient. They're also just easier, right? You don't have to be an expert to have in marketing, to have a one-on-one
Yeah.
conversation, right? Even developers who are pretty introverted, like I am, can do that, right? We all talk to people, and so the question then becomes like, how do you meet your clients? Where are they hanging out, both on and online in the real world, and who already knows them who could potentially introduce you, right? And so I find it's helpful to look at sort of the hubs in your local area, and the hubs online, right? So those might be like co-working spaces, startup accelerators, industry groups, and industry meetups. Those are really, really helpful
Okay.
spaces. And particularly those that are sort of complementary to what you do rather than exactly what you do, right? So for
Mm.
developers, right, like the complementary fields are design and marketing, right? And so if you're the only developer who shows up to a marketing meetup, right, you're going to stand out a little bit. And you're also going to meet a bunch of people who could potentially introduce
I
you
love
or
that.
may
That's
have
brilliant. That's
may
brilliant.
have worked. Yeah,
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 yeah.
and I think that's the other question, right? Who could introduce you? And like,
Yeah.
one of the best sources for introductions are other freelancers who are in those complementary fields, right? Freelance designers and freelance marketers, if you're a developer,
Mm.
are
Mhm.
fantastic because they already know your ideal clients. They're already working with them. They don't compete with you. So they're not going to see you as a threat, and they're also the first people that your clients turn to anytime they're looking for a developer like you, right?
Yeah,
So building relationships with them is hugely effective,
that
and
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Do you
they
mind
also,
if I, like,
yeah,
yeah, talk
go
a little
ahead.
bit more about that? Cause like, so I kind of had the same thought, what that was like, I need to go somewhere that these people are, and so I would go to, like, co-working spaces and things like that, and I would go to, like, events that they had and things like that, but I think the difference is I went to things that might appeal more to engineers, and what I found was that, why I basically stopped doing it, is I found that it was a bunch of other people kind of like me trying to get work And all you do is end up talking to people that just like, I'm like, man, all you're doing is telling me about your whatever project, whatever, and it's not like you're just trying to do the same thing. I don't feel like I stand out in any way. I'm just, how's this going to lead to any work? And so my conclusion was, oh, I shouldn't go to those things. I shouldn't do those things. But it sounds like what you're saying is I might have had the right general idea, but the way I was approaching it and what I was going for was the wrong sort of side of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's exactly right. And like, I'll give you an example. I am a member of a local marketing Slack group. And I'd say at least once a month, but probably, more like every week or two, somebody in the group will say, like, hey, does anybody know a good developer? I'm
Mm.
literally, best I can tell, the only developer in the group, right? So I just have to raise my hand. And the nice
Yeah.
thing, and say, hey, I do this, let's talk. The nice thing is, like, I also have folks I've worked with in the past in that group, so oftentimes somebody will do it for me, and I don't even have to raise my hand
Oh, yeah.
and
They'll be
say
like, "Oh,
yes.
yeah, I know the one
Yeah,
guy here that he can take
right.
care of it for you."
Exactly. And so I think that's the nice thing. Now, obviously, you got to know how to engage people, right? And that's another piece of this, like how you have the
Yeah.
conversations. And so, like, I recommend, like, if you're new, either a newer developer, like you're more junior, or you're new to freelancing, right? Ask for advice, right? And ask for feedback and say, like,
Mm.
hey, like, I'm a developer who's interested in design or who's interested in marketing. I want to, and I want to pick your brain a little bit. Would you be willing to chat for 10 minutes? Like, people love to be helpful. As long as you're being authentic, like, most people will say yes. And then just
Yeah.
ask them about, what their experiences have been with freelancers in the past, right? Like, what's gone well, what has gone poorly, that kind of
Mm.
thing. First of all, it's really disarming, in a way that being like, "Hey, do you have a gig for me?" isn't. But also, you're going to get some hugely valuable information. The
Yeah.
other nice thing about it is that you do not have to sell, right? If they have a gig that you might be a good fit for, they'll just raise their hand and volunteer that information,
Yeah, yeah,
and say, like, "Hey,
exactly.
we should talk. I have this thing. I've been looking for a developer to help." Right? If
Yeah.
not, you can ask them if they know anybody else who'd be, willing to give some advice, and just keep having conversations until you find, your next project, right? And the nice thing that I found about that is, like, usually in about, somewhere between 5 and 15 conversations, you found your next gig. And so it's extremely efficient to do. It's the kind of thing where
Mm.
you can spend, 3 to 5 hours a week once you've kind of learned the process. Um, and, in a couple of weeks, you'll have a new client. And so you compare that to, right, like, that 25 hours plus you have to spend, on
Yeah.
Upwork, or, the hours and hours of, like, creating content that you're not really all that interested in anyways, right? That you got to do.
Yes.
If you're trying to use blogging or social media for a gig, it's way more efficient. And it's also the kind of thing that, like, developers, most of whom I think are probably introverts, can do, right? Like, you don't have to, like, go to these networking events and, like, try to work the room and do the, like, used car salesman thing, right? Like,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
just you talk to people, you pick their brain a little bit, you know, and you ask for introductions, right? That's all you have to do. And there's obviously, like, a whole bunch of nuance on how you have those conversations and that kind of thing. And I get into more of that in my course and in my coaching. But that's the overall strategy, and I found it just so much more efficient. It's also more fun, and it gets more effective the more you do it, because you get more and more relationships and people who are like, "Oh yeah, like, I have to, you know, talk to Thomas when I have this type of problem. He's fantastic." Right?
Yeah.
And people know about you, and so if someone says, "Hey, do you know a developer?" Right? They think of you.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's kind of a flywheel where you get more and more momentum behind your freelance business the more you do it.
That makes sense. So essentially find channels that are not so crowded with other people like yourself, and just sounds like just kind of be a nice, respectful human being and listen to people and make sure they know, I guess, that you can do something. Is that sound right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The one piece that I would sort of add to that
Mhm.
is this is not like a you know, sort of lackadaisical, like if you build it, they will come kind of strategy, right?
Yeah.
It's methodical, right? And so yeah, it's like it's relationship building. It's some people might call it networking, although I honestly I hate that word because I
Yeah.
think it implies something that's just not present in here, which is that kind
Yeah,
of
I
community
agree.
thing,
Yeah, yeah.
right? But it's still methodical, right? You're putting in your time, and I think that's the one of the things that's true of marketing in general, right? Is you have to know what your kind of minimum input is in order to get a
Mhm.
result, right? If you if you put in only a fraction of the effort that you need to in any marketing channel, right, you're not going to have success, right? And with ads, that tends to be thousands and thousands of dollars, right?
Right.
You know, with Upwork, right, it's that 25 to 50 proposals a week, right? With this, it's 3 to 5 hours of conversations a week, right? And so that might mean showing up to a networking event at a co-working space. That might mean actively reaching out to complementary freelancers on LinkedIn and building relationships. It might mean signing up for them and checking your local Slack groups. Put in the time and the effort. Just do it in a respectful way.
Yeah.
Don't spam people just because it's the physical world, right? Like you
Yeah.
wouldn't like send a cold email to a random person being like, "Hey, hire me," which most of us won't do because developers, we hate that kind of thing.
Yes.
And we know it
Yes.
doesn't work.
Yeah.
Then don't do that in the real world either, right?
Right.
Build genuine relationships, and the easiest ways I've found to do that are either ask for advice or contribute value, right? And that's another thing that you can
Mm.
do, right?
That makes
Is
sense, yeah.
like host a workshop or be the guest speaker at a meetup or whatever in one of those complimentary spaces, right? So like
Mm.
teach the basics about web development for designers or the basics about web development for marketers to one of those groups, that kind of thing. And there's all sorts of topics that you can come up with if you think creatively about it.
Yeah,
But
so
ask for advice or contribute value. And if you do that and you do it methodically, you will succeed at this.
that makes sense. So are you saying I should not, focus on building this, AI bot to cold email all of the companies in a directory that I happen to hack my way into? And I just say this because I feel like when I've talked to a lot of people, a lot of engineers getting into freelance, the mentality I often see is using our engineering skills to engineer a way to get clients.
Yeah, I would say you're exactly right. I see a lot of that, and what I really would encourage you to do is just own your marketing and your sales process. Right? Don't
Okay.
outsource it to a third party organization like the Upworks of the world, and don't just try to automate it. I think once you've done it and had
Yeah.
success, right, then you
Yeah.
can think about how to be more efficient with it. And there's all sorts of stuff you can do there. Some of it around automation, some of it not. But like,
Mhm.
um, you don't want to be really efficient at failure, right? And so, like, until you figure out what the right thing is to do and how to do it correctly, um, there's no point in automating it. And I think that's a place where a lot of startups fail, quite frankly, right? Is they don't get product market fit before they try to do the thing that they're
Yes.
doing really fast.
Yes. Yeah,
But
definitely.
it's not a place you as a freelancer, want to slip up either.
So
So that's what I'd say.
that makes 100% sense. And like I think that goes back to what you were saying about also about being in the right channel where you're not the one developer among a thousand. Like I feel like a lot of those approaches, you're the one of a thousand of whatever it happens to be. And I think that, yeah, so that makes sense. I think my hang up, like if we're going to get specific here, is what I've noticed my tendency is I land a client, a couple of clients, and then I stop doing all those things. Um, and the truth is, I just don't. I really don't enjoy it. Like it's this thing where I love meeting people and I love talking to people, but I feel demotivated when it seems like I'm doing it for business reasons or whatever. And so I just basically drop out of those things. Like, get my clients, I'm like, okay, I'm making money. And it's like in the back of my head, I'm like, no, I know from experience I should keep doing these things, but I don't. Do you have any? I don't know. Have you experienced that, or do you just like love it? You're just like, oh yeah, I just
Yeah.
want to do this all the time. And
No, I definitely have. And I think that there's a couple of solutions to that, right? One of them is like um, just how you sort of structure your projects or your retainers, right?
uh huh,
If you've got like a fixed project, right, you're going to know when it's ending, right?
yeah,
And so you've got plenty of notice in that case that you need to start doing this again, right? When you're looking for more work. If you have retainer agreements, I typically build in a notice period. Minimum is typically 30 days for much bigger work that takes up a higher percentage of my time. It might be 60 or 90 days. So
yeah,
again, like I've got notice of when I need to start doing this. And so like that's kind of the nice thing, right? Like when you're first starting out, I recommend doing it repeatedly, on an ongoing basis. A, because you need to get those clients. You want to keep getting more clients if you want to grow your business. But B, because it's good to kind of put in the reps just like you would in, weight training or whatever else.
yeah,
So that you start to get good at it and develop your muscles, your marketing and conversational muscles, right? Um, but I think so that I think is one piece of it is like knowing when you need to start doing it and making sure that you have enough notice that you're not surprised, right? I think another piece of it is really just how you do these things, right?
okay,
And what your ultimate approach is. And I think if ultimately your approach is like um, one where you're not trying to do the schmoozy thing and like feel like you have to
yeah,
sell every single person, right, regardless of whether they're
right,
a good fit. A lot of that sort of demotivation goes away. At least it has for
mm,
me, because you're literally just like you're having conversations, you're getting feedback, you're providing value. But you're doing it in a human way, right? You're not doing it in like okay, I've got my like sales hat
yeah,
on and now I'm gonna schmooze way, right? So it's more fun, and
yeah.
so that
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 sounds a
I think
lot
is
more fun.
that
Yeah,
I think is helpful. I think ultimately, like anything that comes to business is going to be work to some extent, and so part of it is sort of
yeah,
like having the emotional maturity to make sure that you do put in the effort. I found that when I need to do this type of outreach and sort of marketing type work, um, splitting it up into small manageable chunks and saying like, okay, I'm going to do a half hour or an hour a day rather than like 5 hours all at once. Makes it substantially easier, right? And you start to build momentum as your week goes on, rather than like putting it off as this big chunk of work that you have to do. So like that I think is really really helpful as well.
so what you're saying makes sense. And one thing though that caught my attention was you mentioned having like knowledge of when projects are ending. And I feel like that would be super useful, but I don't feel like I've ever ended up in that situation. And maybe this is a transition to talking about some other topics, but like my experience has been, people are like, hey, can you come in for 2 days or a week to, do this, train us on React or, solve this problem for us. Right. And I would go and do that, and then it always turns into just a sort of perpetual thing. Will you just like continue doing development for us essentially? I've never been in the situation where there was ever a clear ending. And I don't know if that's like part of the way I'm doing the sales or the marketing or the positioning, but that actually sounds appealing to me. And I don't know if that is actually desirable, but that sounds good. I don't know if you can speak more to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this gets into two, I think, really important parts of this whole process, right? Which is the sales process and kind of the project design. And
Yeah.
we talked earlier a little bit about kind of co-designing the project, right? But when I get on like a sales call with a client, right? I think like most people, like I usually know a little bit about the project, right? Like whatever's been said over email, but not much more
Yeah.
than that, right? And I think the first question is like, um, you know, okay, like I know, you want a website redesign and relaunch or whatever, like obviously, like we're going to get into the details and talk about scope, but before we do that, tell me about your business goal, right? Why do this project now? Why is it important to the business? And what you're looking for is like a clear business goal or set of business goals, right? Like, are they trying to increase revenue because their website's not converting? Are they trying to decrease costs because it's a ton of effort for the marketing team to maintain the website, and so they're spending all sorts of hours and therefore money that they could be spending, more profitably somewhere else. Are they a tech startup and they need, improved traction? Do they need to improve their site speed? Like, what is it, right?
Yeah.
And then once you know what those problems are, you want to start to quantify the impact, right? So, like, let's say it's they want to improve conversion rates on their website and get more customers or visitors to become customers, right? Then it's like, okay, well, what's their conversion rate now? How much are they making per month? And like, I'll use really obvious numbers just to make the math easy. Let's say they're at 1% conversion rate, which is very, very common, right? And they're making $1 million a month, right? Right then and there, like the value you would generate if you could get them to that average conversion rate of 2%, right? It would be an incremental million
Yeah.
dollars a month in perpetuity, right?
Right.
Um, and so the reason you do this is twofold. Number one, you want to understand how much value the work you're doing is going to provide. But you also want to start to set that tone that you're not just a developer, right? You are a partner in this that is focused on helping them hit their business goals. And that I think is the sort of first key to starting to co-design a project, is to establish yourself as a partner who's going to come with suggestions, right? Not just take their list of to dos from their scope and just do them, right? And so that I find is hugely helpful. Then you start to get into the scope, right? We probably don't have too much time to talk about pricing, other than to say, like, I always just ask them point blank, like, do you have a budget in mind? And that I think is really, really helpful, because you don't want to be guessing like on the order of magnitude of what they're looking to spend.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
do you mind if we, like if I talk a little bit more about my experience with
yeah,
those?
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so it's interesting, a lot of those things you're saying about, like, trying to understand the value you're providing and trying to solve a specific business goal, that's actually the mentality that I've had going into these conversations, but based on what you're saying, it kind of seems like I didn't maybe steer things as strongly in that direction, and so I end up being perceived more as an engineer than a partner. And so, I will find later on with these clients, I'm often like trying to convince them that what they're trying to tell me to develop doesn't make sense, you know? It's like, I know what your business goals are because we had this conversation and you told me, and I know your current state of things. Why are you know, like but it seems like they're maybe viewing and respecting my engineering decisions, but not my business decisions. And,
Right.
you know, based on you saying that, it sounds like that probably started at the very beginning in my conversations with them.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that we all kind of know inherently that we forget it, that like first impressions are everything, right? And that once someone has formed of an impression of you, it's incredibly hard to change the way that they think about you.
Yeah.
And that means like you need to set that tone at the beginning, that you are a partner, that you're, co-designing the project, that you're helping them solve their business goals, not just a code monkey, right? You're still going to be coding, right?
Yeah.
But that's that's just your medium. The art is helping them solve that business goal. So you want to have a sales process that's structured, and a list of things that you do, on every single sales call, to make sure that tone is set and you set those expectations, right?
Yeah.
That
And that's
helps you.
probably related to my positioning then as well, right? Like
Yeah,
that's also part of the first impressions, right?
exactly. And to a point where I literally say to clients, like, if you're looking for any old developer to just ship code, there's probably people out there who are
Yeah.
cheaper, and I'm happy to like make an introduction. If, on the other
Yes.
hand, you want somebody who's going to help you hit this business goal, because they understand the code, but they also understand the business, and that kind of thing, I'm the right person, and I'm happy to speak to some results I've gotten for other clients,
Mm.
to
Mhm.
illustrate that, right? But that I think carries forward in your pricing and even the way you do pricing, right? I tend to literally ask clients what their budget is, and then negotiate on scope more than I negotiate on budget, right? And say like,
Mm.
okay, I know what
Yes.
your business goal
Yeah.
was, right? I now know what your budget is, right? This is what I could do for this amount of money. If you want all of the things you laid out, it might be a little bit more, but like, here's my advice on what I think is most valuable, and you definitely need to do. Here are the things that I think are like nice to have, and frankly, this thing's not going to move the needle at all. So unless there's another business goal that we didn't really talk about, we may not need to actually do this. And the good clients actually appreciate that, right?
Yeah.
Because you're helping them make an informed business decision. I also, tend to inform clients, on the first call, or when pricing comes up, about the range of prices they're likely to see. If they talk to other freelancers or agencies, and what they will likely get for that amount of money.
Mm.
That's not only very disarming, but it's actively helpful, and again
I love
positions you
that.
as a
That's
partner.
yes, yes, that's brilliant. And yeah, and then like you sort of sidestep that whole issue of like, well, somebody else did it for me for less, or I could, that type of thing.
Right, right, and you want to inform them, right? Like, if a
Right.
client's a
It's not
penny
about
pincher.
trying to like get more money out of them. It's just that you're providing a different value than that person
Right,
provided
right.
potentially.
And if a client's a penny pincher, like, you can still make money off of them, right? And there's different ways to do it, right? One of them might be to partner with another freelancer who's like, a little bit less senior,
Yeah.
a little less business oriented, and say like, all right, I'm going to refer you to this person because they're a great fit, they're absolutely fantastic, and they can help you do your project at this price point, and get a referral fee from that other freelancer, right? So there's ways to kind of, to handle this. But honestly, like, I think the most important thing is to just be a good steward for your clients.
Yeah.
That reputation gets around. I've had clients who I've referred to other freelancers or agencies, totally without a referral fee or anything like that, come back to me, months or years later, and say like, okay, now we're ready for you. Um,
Yeah.
so
That's
yeah, but
awesome.
I
Yeah.
want to make sure that I answer your question about the, knowing when a project is gonna actually end, because it's kind of a long slow build to that. But once you've kind of done all of that stuff, right, you start to converge on, um, a proposal and a statement of work, right, and that might happen, in one call. It might take several calls where you kind of work out some of the details. But like once they've kind of accepted, like, okay, like, you know, I had this initial list of 50 things in mind. You suggested that these 25 are the most important, and also that we add this, 51st thing, right? Let's do this. I'm excited about this at this price point, and that kind of thing. You want to make sure you put together a really clear proposal, and ultimately a statement of work, right? And that statement of work should have, the scope, the timeline, what's required of you, like the deliverables you're going to produce, but also what's required of them, right? These are the things that the company has to provide. This is how
Mm,
much they're going to pay and when, right? This much upfront,
yeah.
this much, at the end. This is how long the project's going to last. And if it's a retainer, right, this is the notice period, right? I also tend to include there, like, this is the max number of calls that we can have a week, right? Like, this is
Yeah.
how we're going to communicate, right? You just communicate that stuff up front, right? Because if they want more calls or more conversations, like, that's okay. You just want to make sure you account for it and charge them for it, right? And
Yeah.
so it sounds like, what's happened with you, right, is maybe that you haven't been clear enough in your kind of statements of work, or
Definitely.
when
Yeah.
you finish your first, your kind of first project, right? And the vast majority of clients who you're going to have a retainer with don't start off as retainers, right? They start off as a one-off project and kind of transition in, right? So
Yeah.
when you transition, you want to make sure that you sign a retainer agreement with them, which is effectively just a statement of work that says, this is going to continue automatically, unless say no, right? And make sure you include, like, here's how much notice you have to give. And so usually, like, I do 30 days notice, in both directions. That way they're not
Yeah.
surprised,
Right. Yeah.
and scrambling to find someone, and I'm not surprised and scrambling to find more work. Um,
Yeah.
and when you do that, right, you are super informed about, like, the health of your business, and with plenty of time that you need to find another client, if something changes.
That makes a lot of sense. It's definitely not something I've done. I think it's all been wrapped up in the sort of mentality of like I feel like I just don't like doing all the work around getting the
Right.
work. And so I'm like, yeah, I got work. I'll just like go with the flow. But I think, sort of even at a higher level, maybe a bigger summary of everything we've been talking about is like goes back to one of those goals I had at the beginning, which was like I wanted to have more control over my work. And it sounds to me like a lot of what you're saying is that is not only like kind of a goal of mine, but that actually is kind of the core of a lot of this is if I am going into all of these situations with the mentality of like, hey, I'm designing this. I'm the one creating this. I'm the one setting the boundaries. I'm the one doing this. You're going to be in a lot better position than going into it where the client is the one doing everything. And I think even like when you look at Upwork versus the type of work we've been talking about, that's like kind of the main difference is like in my mind at least those like lower value things are more of like the client really is the one fully in control of everything and you're just like yeah give me a few pennies here to like get the work done type of thing is that kind of makes
Yeah,
sense as
I
like a
think that's
higher level
exactly
summary.
right. Yeah, that is exactly right. And I'm glad you brought that Upwork example up, because that's exactly what I mean by, like, not outsourcing your marketing and your sales efforts,
Ah,
right?
okay.
Like, Upwork controls, for better or worse, right, the marketing and sales process when you're on Upwork, right?
Yes.
They
Yeah.
control how you find projects, who you meet, how you submit proposals. They've got a fairly structured, which is a good thing, sales process and steps you need to go through, but it's their sales process and their steps, not yours, right? And I think you really want to own your marketing, your sales, because it's the lifeblood of your business, right?
Yeah.
And so, but that doesn't mean just wing it. right? It means, set a process for yourself and systematically test and improve that process every time, right? And when you talk about wanting to like control your own destiny or have kind of more agency in your career, right? Like that's super common. It's one of the biggest motivations that
Yeah.
people have for freelancing because they don't feel like they get that in a full time job, and it's
Yes.
and for the most part they typically don't. The way to do that isn't just to wing it, right? If you want to
Yeah.
control something, it means plan it, test it, improve it, and be methodical about it, right? Approach it the way you would approach a coding project, right?
Yes. I was just gonna
That
say
go
that.
out,
Yes, you're right.
and build it, right, like, write unit tests, if you will, right? Like do all
Yeah,
the stuff
yeah.
that you would do to build a high quality piece of software, right? You're doing the same
And you
thing. You're just
design it then too, right? Like you're not coming into it
exactly,
being like, I'm gonna let the computer tell me how to do this, Like you're coming in being like, no, I know this is the way to structure this to make it higher quality code, and I'm gonna do that. Yeah.
exactly, and that's what kind of I provide in the free course and the resources on freelancegps.com, and in my coaching is that structure and that knowledge of like, here's what works, right? Here are the pitfalls you want to avoid, right? And it's the same thing you would do if you were learning a new language or a new framework, right? Like you go and you get that information from people who have done it before, so that you can start to learn how to apply it in your own life.
Yeah. That Yeah, that sounds excellent. Um, yeah, I guess at this point, we can probably start wrapping things up. This was super enlightening to me, and like, just to sort of summarize my viewpoint of it is like, I think my big takeaway is that I set out with, like I said, this goal to sort of take more charge, but I only partially did it. And I think something that I would look at changing is being a lot more intentional about it. Everything from the marketing and sales to the actual implementation. Um, so yeah, I really appreciate you digging into a bit of my experience and providing this feedback. Is there anything else you'd like to cover or discuss?
Yeah, I think just ways you can find me. Obviously, I'm on freelancegps.com. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn. I love talking to other developers and freelancers, so don't hesitate to reach out. I answer every email personally. When you'll get some emails from me if you sign up for the course that ask questions. I actually want the answers.
No
And
way. That's
uh,
awesome, actually. So many
yeah,
people are just like, oh, it's like all automated. And you're like, well, I don't really care then?
yeah, totally, totally. And I do free strategy sessions with anybody who signs up for the free course and wants to do one. So if you're a freelancer or interested in becoming a freelancer, and you've got challenges or questions, or you're not sure how to start, we can chat, and I'd be psyched to help you out. This is a big goal of mine, is just helping other developers and designers and tech folks succeed at freelancing, because it's been just so transformational for my life. And so it's something I'm hugely passionate about, and why I'm putting so much time into building freelance GPS while I'm also still serving business clients and doing the consulting thing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Like I said earlier, giving back like that is really a tremendous benefit to everyone. I think that's awesome. So, uh, like you said, the best place to find you would be freelancegps.com. Is that right?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Tim, and thank you everyone else who's been listening for joining us. I had a great time, and I really learned a lot, and I just want to thank you, Tim, for your time and your expertise, and for setting me in the right direction here. And I hope it's been useful to everyone else listening as well. And yeah, thank you all for joining us, and I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye.